Salve te omnes. So we are going to do our culture right now. You can watch this video to do your culture reading, or you can read it separately. If you want to like read it with a friend, you can get social and read it with a friend. So I want to give you guys some culture notes as we read. So listening to this video might give you a little bit more extra detail, extra ideas to think about than just simply reading the book. Let me go ahead and present my screen. So our culture reading starts at page 128, the worship of Isis. Now remember, the goddess Isis is pretty much the queen of the gods for the ancient Egyptians, and she has influence all over the Roman Empire and the Roman world. So she's a very special goddess. She has, love and beauty aspects, kind of like Aphrodite. She has wisdom and creation aspects, kind of like Athena. And then she also has the kind of more queenly, like regal aspects, kind of like Hera. But in addition, she kind of has this kind of spooky darkness. So maybe she's kind of like Hades or Persephone too. It's not like there's a one-to-one between the Roman and the Egyptian gods. Remember, the Egyptians have their own separate religion and pantheon. It's just when the Romans came, they took things that made sense to them and kind of reworked it, rebranded it, right? In order to make it kind of work for them. So before we do this reading, I want to go through some of these pictures. Let's start with this fun bubble on the side here. This tells us some of the mythologies too. So Isis, according to the Egyptians, Isis loved her brother Osiris, and he appears on earth in the form of a man. So here we see Osiris, green, and he has the Egyptian king hat. And here we see Isis on the side. She has kind of like a neat, kind of like a hawk hat or vulture hat or eagle. I'm not really sure what kind of bird that is. She has a bird on her head. And then she also has these horns with a sun disk in the middle. She's often depicted with that kind of crown. However, Osiris was murdered. His body was cut up into little pieces and they were scattered all over the world. Overcome with grief, Isis set out on the search for Osiris's corpse. When at last she found all of the pieces, a miracle took place, and the dead Osiris was given new life and became the father of their child, Horus. And so Egyptians worship Isis as a bringer of new life because of the aspects of that myth and that creation myth. So thinking about new life, maybe you're thinking about the myth of Demeter and Persephone bringing new life in the springtime. Or maybe there's other myths. Let's bring it up later in our afternoon session if you have any ideas. So here we see a relief. So it actually has more of a painting in the background of it. This is from the 13th century BC. Pretty incredible. And it's from the temple of Seti at Abydos, which is the headquarter of Osiris worship. And so he wears the white crown of Upper Egypt here, and it has feathers on either side. Isis has these horns and the sun disk. This represents the god Hathor. Oh, and I was looking at my teacher notes here. This is indeed a vulture headdress. The tribe Isis, Horus, and Osiris represent the powers of creation, birth, rebirth, death, that kind of cycle, right? Osiris representing death, Isis representing rebirth, and Horus representing new life and birth. Here we see the coin on the side. This is the coin that's in the very beginning of our Alexandria readings, and we see the Pharos in the back, and it looks like a person holding a sail of a ship. This Pharos this is representing Isis. She's the protector of sailing and shipping. So not only is she this goddess that represents love and beauty and creation and rebirth, and she's the queen, she's also the goddess of shipping and sailing. And it's springtime to the Greeks and Romans. Springtime is indeed the sailing season. And so she kind of, there's new life in the spring, and one of the aspects, one of the things you can do in the spring with that new life in the spring is finally sail. It's like the waters are finally navigable. Scrolling down, looking at more pictures here. Isis is often portrayed as a loving mother. So here we see baby Horus, and he's being nursed. And I'm looking at my teacher notes here real quick. That's really about it. And then finally, we see the Nile in a flood. So look out, this guy, he can't even leave his house. There's water all around him. He has to take a boat. Now, the Egyptians believe that Isis sent these floods, which brought Egypt its fertile soil. So thinking about rebirth, right? The floods would bring and deposit rich nutrients into the soil for the Egyptian farmers. And so this would bring new life, new crops. So it's, despite everything that Isis is the goddess of, the one tie-in is it has to do with anything that goes away and comes back again in a new way. So thinking about springtime, right? Thinking about, fertility and rebirth in that way. Let's go ahead and read the information on page 128. Isis was one of Egypt's oldest and most important goddesses. The Egyptians worshipped Isis for her power to bring new life. See, guys, there it is. It's despite all these little aspects about her, her main thing is the ability to bring new life. They believe that she was responsible for the new life which followed on the annual flooding on the Nile waters. She offers hope of life after death for those who became her followers. One of the most important festivals of Isis was held at the beginning of spring. It took place annually on March 5th, so it's like a month ago they would have been celebrating that. That's kind of cool. So annually on March 5th, when the sailing season opened and the large grain ships, which were incredibly crucial to Rome's food supply, could once again set off across the Mediterranean. Now remember, one of the main reasons that the Romans conquered Egypt in the 1st century AD, it wasn't necessarily politics all aside, getting more land and people and slaves all aside. The number one thing, Rome had a growing empire. And when your empire is growing, you need to feed the people. Egypt was like the grain belt of the Roman Empire, especially because of the rich, fertile soil from the Nile. And so on March 5th, it represented not only, springtime and the rebirth of all the flowers and everything else, but it's also when those large ships could go from Egypt and safely sail all the way to Rome. And so there was a big festival. In our stories, Dies Festus, we're going to be reading about this festival. And so in this festival, a statue of Isis was carried down to the great harbor. So kind of taking her on a little tour of the city and taking her to the harbor, that ship would kind of set off representing like, hey, now it is safe to sail. The procession was headed by dancers and musicians playing pipes, trumpets, and castanets. Female attendants are scattering roses into the road over tightly packed crowds. You want to think maybe this is kind of like a big Mardi Gras kind of parade. The statue of Isis was carried high on the shoulders of the priests, and so that everybody can get a glimpse of the goddess in her splendid robe or dress. After that came more priests and priestesses, more trumpeters, and finally there was a high priest wearing garlands of roses and carrying a sacred rod called a sistrum. Really quick, we talked about the festival of Isis a little bit a couple chapters ago when we were first introduced to the goddess. So we have to remember that this is kind of like their version of Mardi Gras, their celebration of spring and being thankful for all the things. And we see these dancers and musicians and flower girls and priests all in our model sentences. Let's go and take a look back there. Right? So here we see our dancers and trumpeters, our priests carrying the cult statue of the goddess dressed in a fine robe. And we don't see one in this picture, but they're technically on their way to the harbor. And back here, there should be some kind of high priest, like the #1 priest, and he is the most decked out. Or she, actually. We'll learn in a second that in the cult of Isis, women could be high priests, whereas most cults, they were not allowed. Now, I want to find a picture really quick because I want to give you guys a good idea of what this kind of would have looked like. Okay. So we're taking a look. Going to go images. I'm going to find the right image that I want to show you guys. Maybe I'll type in sistrum. So the high priest would be holding a sistrum. So here we see a nice picture from the Egyptian side. So here we see the Egyptian canon, excuse me, the Egyptian style of art. We see our sacred rattle here. Here we see a kind of Roman depiction. Oh, I like this picture even better. This is perfect. And of course, it's on Pinterest. Anyways, pinning from Wikipedia. Interesting. I love this sculpture of the goddess Isis. I've seen it before in a museum. I love that it's on this page. Okay, so let's take a look here. We're actually going to dissect the goddess Isis a little bit more next week. But here's a Roman depiction of her. And we see, ooh, that's not what I want to do. Oh, well. What keeps happening? I don't understand. Okay, so we see she's carrying a jug here, and this is to represent the floodwaters of the Nile. It's amazing what sculptors can do with marble. Look how they make it look like real fabric. Like this is a rock. Somebody took a rock and they carved it with such detail. It's beautiful. We're going up and up. Let's look at the detail of her hand. How magnificent is that? Okay, so we're looking at her sacred rattle here. So it's kind of like a noisemaker that you might get at a birthday party. Usually there's beads on here to really make a lot of noise. We see a rosette at the top. And what I love about this is that this would be representing a high priest or priestess of the goddess Isis. We see holes where they probably would have looped gold earrings into the statue. But one of the great things about the cult of Isis is that women could be priestesses. So it's neat. I love art. Okay. At the harbor, a newly built ship was moored. Its stern was shaped like a goose's neck, and it was covered with gold plate. First, the high priest dedicates the ship to Isis and offers prayers. Then the priests, priestesses, and other people loaded the boat up with gifts of spices and flowers, and fine ropes were unfastened, and the wind carried the ship out to sea. Now, keep in mind, the cult statue of the goddess Isis belongs to the temple. It does not go on the boat. It just goes there to witness the boat going off. After the ceremony at the harbor, the statue of Isis is taken back to the temple. The spectators crowd into the open area in front of the temple, and the priests replace the statue in the cella or sanctuary. Then a priest read to the people from a sacred book and recited prayers for the safety of the Roman people and their emperor, and for sailors and ships.